Leroy Nicky Barnes was perhaps Harlem's and one of the country's biggest drug dealers. He sported the fur coats and fancy cars that marked his success. At 45, he was known as the Untouchable because the law couldn't seem to lay a hand on him. But today, he was sentenced to life in prison, presumably now stripped of his hero's garb in the underworld. Barnes is appealing his conviction.
Nicky Barnes go free. Leroy Nicky Barnes, who for 7 years in the 1970s was godfather of the largest and most profitable heroin-selling operation in the history of New York City. Between 1973 and 77, Barnes was arrested variously for homicide, bribery, drug dealing, and gun possession, but none of the charges stuck. He became a Harlem legend and very rich, and whatever he had, he flaunted, be it women or Rolls Royces. But in 1977, suddenly Barnes was busted, convicted of heroin dealing, and sent away for life without parole. Then 4 years later in prison, Nicky Barnes turned government informant and began to tell all he knew. And because his testimony helped put 50 other people in prison, there are those in government who say he should be pardoned. Among the people he informed on were his former drug colleagues and his women. How did he feel testifying against them?
I was overwhelmed by guilt. I was overwhelmed by guilt. I had every reason to testify against them and no reason at all to feel guilty. But it's that street corner indoctrination, that criminal ethic, that street corner value system, it's overpowering. And I started crying on the stand.
From guilt.
Yeah.
And emotion.
And emotion. I couldn't talk.
Barnes testified about his secret 7-member drug council, composed of the most successful black heroin dealers in New York, some of whom attended this birthday party for Barnes in the middle 70s. According to Barnes, they shared an oath of brotherhood and loyalty to one another.
The oath of brotherhood was 7 words. Treat my brother as I treat myself. To treat my brother as I treat myself. And there was a certain mystical dynamic present when we said it.
You ever kill anybody?
No.
Had other people do it for you?
I guess that would best describe it, yeah. Yeah.
These pictures of addicts and dealers were taken by police at the time Barnes was kingpin. Between 1973 and 79, when Barnes operated, more than 2,100 people died in New York City alone from drug overdose. And according to the DEA, most of those deaths were caused by heroin supplied by Barnes' organization. He paid his street sellers not in money, but in heroin. And since many of them were addicts, that ensured an active and loyal sales force. But in 1977, Barnes, who had been arrested 13 times on various charges but never convicted, was indicted once again. What was his reaction to this latest indictment? He posed for the cover of the New York Times Sunday magazine. They called him Mr. Untouchable. Among the interested readers that Sunday morning was President Jimmy Carter. The former U.S. attorney from New York who prosecuted Barnes was Bob Fisk.
I got a call on Monday morning after the Sunday in which that article appeared from Griffin Bell,
The Attorney General.
the Attorney General, who told me that the President had read the article and had told Attorney General Bell that he felt that the case we had against Barnes in the Southern District of New York was the most important case in his administration because as he read that article, he felt that this case was a classic test of whether our criminal justice system works in this country.
1 year after his indictment, Leroy Nicky Barnes was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. It was while Barnes was in prison that he suspected that the 2 main women in his life, Thelma Grant and Shemeka, were sleeping with his former business partners, thus violating the code of honor that he says existed on the street.
Thelma was a very attractive woman. And in New York, there are several million eligible men. Now, I told her that we have a hands-off policy to about 20 of them. Now, the other 4 or 5 million that are out there, you do your own thing. But you know, try and be discreet with whatever it is you decide to do.
From prison, Barnes would call his former friends on the street, collect, and through them he was able to have Thelma Grant followed 24 hours a day. The trail soon led to a drug dealer named Tito Johnson.
So I called one of my buddies, you know. And he said, yeah, he said, Nick, he said, yeah, she was on 7th Avenue. In your Mercedes, in your white Mercedes. And he said, I didn't even see him. They called me to the car. He said, Tito called me to the car because he wanted me to see that he had your woman. And Tito was driving my cars. Oh, he never had a foreign car. He was a Buick Oldsmobile man.
And that began to eat on you.
Yeah.
And that eventually led to that call to Bill Tendy.
Yeah.
William Tendy is executive U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. The call to him was made by Barnes from the Terre Haute Federal Prison in Indiana.
Tell me what it is you have in mind.
They were public friends of mine that were supposed to be doing things for me, you know.
Yeah.
And well, they're doing things against me, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no way to reach out to get to them, and I want to get back at them, really.
Mm-hmm.
That's my primary reason.
Were you surprised that he was going to do it?
I was surprised that a person like Nicky Barnes would do it, but when I ultimately found out the reason why he was doing these things, it made sense to me.
How important was the information
I think it was terribly important.
in that?
I think it was terribly important because it resulted in the conviction of Barnes as the hardcore of Barnes' entire operation.
See, the thing that held me together was my values. And I was tied into the criminal ethic, the street corner values that I had, the oath of brotherhood, the warmth and loyalty that I thought flowed between council members or among the council members and myself. That was gone. I mean, the whole thing exploded.
Was there a drug council?
Oh, the drug council is a myth. It's the first time I heard of council was when I was in court in 1983.
Guy Fisher, who had a brief affair with Barnes' former girlfriend, Shemeka, was a member of that 7-man drug council, according to Barnes. Fisher is now serving life without parole after Barnes testified against him.
You mean to tell me that you can give someone a life plus sentence because you say he had sex with my girlfriend?
And he's putting people behind bars, helping to make cases for the feds.
There is no justice in terms of that. Oh, man. I mean, 8 years ago, Nick was the scum of the earth in terms of court, being in the courtroom, in Judge Worker's court. And then 3 years ago, he became Robin Hood because he was telling. It's really sad, you know. I'm laughing, but it's sad.
Though Barnes says now he began to talk against his former drug associates like Fisher out of a motive of revenge, it soon became apparent that freedom was mostly on his mind. And since Barnes knew he could only be released through a presidential pardon, he understood that the government wanted more from him. So he testified before the President's Commission on Organized Crime, wearing a hood, telling the commission about drug operations in New York. And Barnes began to snitch on his fellow inmates as well. Inside prison, Barnes learned about illegal activities that he described to prison authorities.
I'm a bookmaker, and right now on camera I want to lay you 9 to 5 that Nicky Barnes, Leroy Barnes, gets out of jail.
New York gangster Herbie Sperling spoke with Barnes when they were in prison together in New York, and they worked out a drug deal at Barnes' suggestion that eventually resulted in the conviction of Sperling's son.
I'm doing the same sentence that Nicky Barnes was doing.
Life without parole.
Without parole. I've got it the longest in the country. It's worse than a death sentence. A death sentence, you're dead, and life goes on. Here you linger, and sometimes people get depressed. Now, some people get so depressed that they decide to make up a story.
You think he's going to get out?
There's no doubt in my mind. The government has to let him out. This is part of their propaganda ploy. What they're saying is, anybody that wants to get out, just make up stories about a lot of people. We got plenty of room. We got a lot of prisons. We'll replace them with you, and we'll let you out. No matter what you did, no matter what you do.
For Barnes' cooperation, he has now gained many supporters in the Justice Department who want to see him eventually released. One of those is Rudolph Giuliani, now U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, whose office prosecuted most of the cases that resulted from Barnes' testimony. We talked to Giuliani in front of Jagazy's in Harlem, a former Barnes hangout.
I think he should be given credit for his having cooperated with the government to encourage others to come forward and cooperate and bust up these operations. He essentially, what should happen with him, in my view, is at some point he should be permitted to be released from prison. At some point.
We talked to old pals of his who are now in Lewisburg prison. They said, listen, he's a snitch. He'll be on the street in no time. They really believe that the only reason that he did it was not because he got religion, but because he wants to get out on the street and that you're going to help him do just that.
I think that the realistic situation here has to be that when people turn in, organizations like this account for 50 people being convicted. Everyone he's testified against has been convicted and their cases have been upheld on appeal. There has to be some reward for that. That's the only way we can combat this kind of activity.
In fact, the Justice Department has rewarded informants in the past with freedom. Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano, who personally admitted to committing 9 murders, served a 21-month sentence and is now free, though a protected witness. Gary Bodak, who admitted to carrying out 1 gangland murder and attempting 2 others, became a federal witness and was placed in the Witness Protection Program. He was never prosecuted for the murder. And Frank Lucas, a major drug dealer, informed and was released from a life sentence. Within 3 months of his release, he was arrested for heroin possession and sent back to prison. Again, Bob Fisk, the former U.S. attorney from New York, the man who put Barnes away.
Should Nicky Barnes have his sentence commuted? Should he get out of prison for the help that he has given the federal government?
I would be opposed to that. We sent a message, we thought we sent a message that no one is above the law. We sent a message to those kids in Harlem that we're putting Nicky Barnes on the same level with Reggie Jackson as a role model. Mr. Untouchable is not untouchable, and there is no future for you in drug dealing. And I think it undercuts the significance of that conviction of that man for everything he did if 8 years into his sentence he is now put out on the street.
One of the people who knew Barnes best during the days he was heroin kingpin was his attorney, Dave Breitbart. It was Breitbart who defended Barnes in the 1970s as a drug dealer and is supportive of him today in Barnes' new role as a government informant.
You know, Barnes was a bad guy. Barnes has gone through a metamorphosis. If they made the rules that someone should benefit by becoming an informant, no one has done more, no one has created more cases, no one has put more people in jail, and has done it with a degree of integrity and with a degree of honesty from what I read.
Is Nicky Barnes going to spend the rest of his life in prison?
If the government doesn't cut him loose, I think they're crazy. There's no reason. He's played their game by their rules. He fought them, now he joined them.
Do you think that you should get a pardon after all the pain and misery that you caused?
I think that I deserve some type of relief. Because it's customary. I don't see why policy of the Justice Department should change because of Nicky Barnes.
If they let him out, Barnes says, he would like to teach the young about the dangers of drug addiction. Were he to get out, he would have to remain in the Witness Protection Program, guarded for the rest of his life by the U.S. Marshals.